Welcome, the anointed ones. Never confuse a trail of victims with a trail of victories. Some people do not rise because they are powerful. They rise because nobody has stopped them yet. There is a chilling truth that history has proven again and again. The most dangerous people often become convinced of their own invincibility, not because they are unbeatable, but because they have spent years facing people who were afraid, isolated, exhausted, or simply unwilling to fight back. After enough easy wins, arrogance starts masquerading as greatness. Confidence mutates into delusion, and eventually, they begin to believe that every person they meet will become another name on their long list of casualties. That is where the story changes, because every so often, a person comes along who does not fit the pattern. The funny thing about bullies, manipulators, and self-appointed kings is that they become addicted to predictable outcomes. They walk into every battle expecting the same ending. It is like a gambler who wins so many hands that he starts believing the cards are personally in love with him. The problem: reality has a wicked sense of humor. Just when someone thinks they have mastered the game, life slides a completely different opponent across the table. And that is exactly what this topic is about. This is about the moment someone who has spent years steamrolling others suddenly runs into a wall they did not see coming. They thought they were studying you. They thought they had you figured out. They thought you would react like everyone else before you. But what they failed to understand is that experience does not always create wisdom. Sometimes it only creates overconfidence. In fact, one of the biggest reasons powerful-looking people collapse is because past success blinds them to present danger. The very victories that made them feel unstoppable become the reason they stop paying attention. They stop questioning themselves. They stop adapting. They stop imagining they could be wrong. And then comes the shock. Not the shock of losing an argument, not the shock of facing resistance. The shock of discovering that the person they underestimated was never who they thought they were. What happens when someone who built their reputation on fear finally meets someone who is not afraid? What happens when a person who has always controlled the narrative suddenly loses control of the story? What happens when years of unchecked behavior collide with a reality they can no longer manipulate? That is when the masks begin to crack, and by the time they realize what they have walked into, the lesson has already begun. And before you go, there is one final thing I want to ask of you. If this message has placed the word kept somewhere in you where it needed to go, honor that with an act of faithfulness. Go to the link in the pinned comment below. Plant a seed. Give what your heart says to give, a coffee, a small offering, whatever feels right. Because what you sow into a mission that carries this kind of word to the next person who is still doing the arithmetic at midnight, still counting the wrong treasure, still needing to hear that the portion was never lost, returns to you as more of the very inheritance being declared. And share this with someone whose hands have been clenched around too little for too long. Be the reason they heard today that they are not poor. They were only looking in the wrong place. The link is pinned. Heaven sees what you do with this moment. Let us get into it. Number 1. They mistook previous victories for personal greatness. One of the most dangerous illusions a person can develop is believing that past victories automatically prove personal greatness. The truth is, winning repeatedly can sometimes teach the wrong lesson. Instead of becoming wiser, some people become blind. Instead of becoming stronger, they become arrogant. Instead of asking why they succeeded, they simply assume they are superior to everyone around them. This is exactly what happens to people who have spent years intimidating, manipulating, controlling, or overpowering others. After a while, they stop seeing individuals. Everyone becomes just another obstacle to crush, another person to outsmart, another trophy to add to their collection. What they never stop to consider is whether their victories actually came from their own brilliance or from the circumstances surrounding the people they defeated. Some people were not beaten because they were weak. They were exhausted. Some were not defeated because they lacked intelligence. They were carrying burdens nobody could see. Some were not overcome because the other person was powerful. They simply chose peace over conflict. But a person obsessed with winning rarely understands these differences. They look at the result and immediately credit themselves. That is where the trap begins. The more victories they collect, the less self-aware they become. They start believing their own mythology. Every success becomes evidence that they are untouchable. Every victory becomes proof that they are operating on a higher level than everyone else. Their ego grows larger than their judgment. Then, one day they meet someone who does not fit into the categories they have learned to exploit. Someone who is not desperate for approval. Someone who is not intimidated by status. Someone who does not panic under pressure. Someone who is not interested in playing the game at all. Suddenly, their usual tactics stop producing the same results. The intimidation falls flat. The manipulation gets noticed. The mind games fail to create confusion. For the first time in a long time, they encounter resistance that cannot be easily controlled. What makes this moment so devastating is that it does not just threaten their plans. It threatens their identity. If they have spent years believing they were exceptional because of their victories, what happens when those victories stop coming? The answer is simple. They are forced to face a possibility they have avoided their entire lives. Maybe they were not as powerful as they thought. Maybe they were simply benefiting from situations that made them look powerful. And for someone whose confidence was built on that illusion, nothing is more terrifying than reality finally showing up. I want to stop here with you for just a breath before we go into the final part of this word. You have stayed through every layer of this, and that itself is the quiet trust of a heart beginning to open. This channel was built to carry this kind of word to people who have been living as renters in a house they own, counting wages when they were born to an inheritance. If this message has been placing that truth in you today, go to the link in the pinned comment below. Give what your heart offers freely. A coffee, a small seed, anything at all, because what you plant into a mission that carries this kind of word to hearts that have been bracing for too long returns to you as more of the very receiving being described. The link is pinned. Give when your spirit says yes. Number 2, they built their reputation on people who could not fight back. One of the most uncomfortable truths in life is that not everyone who looks powerful actually is. Some people build entire reputations on defeating opponents who never had a real chance to begin with. They spend years collecting victories, but those victories are carefully selected. They do not challenge people who can expose them. They do not seek battles on equal ground. They look for situations where the outcome is already tilted in their favor. This is why some individuals appear unstoppable for years. They become experts at identifying vulnerability. They can spot loneliness, insecurity, financial struggle, emotional exhaustion, and self-doubt from a mile away. These become the hunting grounds where they feel strongest. Every victory adds another layer to their confidence. Every successful manipulation convinces them they possess some extraordinary ability. What they fail to realize is that they are measuring themselves against people who were already carrying heavy burdens. A person struggling to survive is not fighting at full strength. A person desperate for acceptance is not operating from confidence. A person healing from past wounds is not always able to defend themselves properly. Yet, the predator sees the outcome and mistakes it for proof of superiority. Over time, this creates a dangerous delusion. They begin believing they can dominate anyone. Their past experiences teach them the wrong lesson. They think they are masters of people when they have actually become masters of exploiting weakness. Then, reality introduces a different kind of person, someone who knows their value, someone who is not seeking validation, someone who does not crumble under pressure, someone who can recognize manipulation before it takes root. That is when everything starts to unravel. The tactics that worked for years suddenly look cheap and obvious. The intimidation no longer creates fear. The psychological games no longer create confusion. The pressure no longer produces obedience. For the first time, they discover that their success depended heavily on the condition of their targets. And that realization is devastating, because now they must face a truth they spent years avoiding. They were never defeating strength. They were defeating vulnerability. They were not conquering giants. They were stepping over people who were already wounded and calling it victory. The moment they encounter someone standing firmly on their own feet, their entire reputation begins to shake, not because the other person is trying to destroy them, but because genuine strength has a way of exposing counterfeit power without saying a single word. That is the day the illusion starts dying. Number 3. They never expected someone to remain unshaken. Before we go further, I want to pause here with you for just a moment. You have stayed through every word, and that itself is the trust of an heir beginning to believe. This channel was built to carry this kind of word to hearts that have been counting the wrong treasure for years, who need someone to speak the deed with their name on it out loud. If this message has been doing that for you today, consider going to the link in the pinned comment below. Give what your heart freely offers. A coffee, a small seed, anything at all, because what you plant into a mission that carries this kind of word to people whose hands have been clenched around too little for too long returns to you as more of the very open-handed inheritance being described. The link is pinned. Give when your spirit says yes. One of the biggest mistakes manipulative and controlling people make is that everyone can be moved the same way. They spend years studying reactions. They know how to trigger fear. They know how to create anxiety. They know how to make people doubt themselves. They know exactly which buttons to push, because those buttons have worked countless times before. What they do not understand is that their power was never really in what they did. Their power was in the reaction they received. That distinction changes everything. Many people spend years believing someone is powerful simply because of the effect they have on others. But remove the fear, remove the panic, remove the emotional chaos, and suddenly the person does not look nearly as intimidating as before. This is why certain individuals become completely unsettled when they meet someone who remains calm under pressure. They expect anger, they expect desperation, they expect emotional outbursts, they expect endless explanations and attempts to defend oneself. Instead, they are met with stillness, and stillness is something they do not know how to fight. The reason is simple. Their entire strategy depends on controlling the emotional temperature of the room. The moment they can make someone afraid, they gain influence. The moment they can make someone react emotionally, they gain leverage. But when a person stays grounded, observes carefully, and refuses to be emotionally dragged into the chaos, the manipulator suddenly loses their biggest advantage. This often creates a strange reversal. The person who was supposed to feel uncomfortable remains composed. The person who expected control becomes frustrated. The person who expected obedience starts becoming reckless. The roles begin to switch. What makes this even more fascinating is that calmness forces hidden truths to surface. Without emotional distractions, patterns become easier to see. Lies become more obvious. Motives become harder to hide. If this word is already reaching the place in you that has been afraid to receive, I want you to respond right now, like this message, as your first act of agreement with what I am placing in your hands today. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so that every message prepared for you finds you at exactly the right moment. And go to the link in the pinned comment below. By sowing into this mission, you are helping carry this kind of word to hearts that are still counting the wrong treasure, still confusing the wage with the inheritance. What you give comes back to you as the very open-handed receiving being described. The link is pinned. Give when your spirit says yes, and then stay because there is still more ahead. The manipulator starts feeling exposed because their usual smokescreen is no longer working. That is the moment they begin realizing something they never anticipated. You were not operating from fear, you were observing. You were learning. You were understanding exactly who they were. And while they believed they were controlling the situation, they failed to notice that their influence depended entirely on a reaction they never received. Nothing frustrates a controlling person more than discovering that the storm they carefully created could not move the mountain standing in front of them. Number 4. Their greatest weakness was hidden inside their greatest strength. One of the strangest things about downfall is that it rarely comes from a person's weakness. More often it comes from the very thing they believed made them untouchable. The trait they trusted the most eventually becomes the reason everything starts falling apart. People who spend years dominating others often do not notice this happening. They become addicted to the qualities that brought them success in the past. Their boldness becomes recklessness. Their confidence becomes arrogance. Their ability to influence people becomes manipulation. Their willingness to take risks becomes a refusal to respect limits. At first, these traits seem to work perfectly. They get what they want. They control situations. They stay 10 steps ahead of everyone else. People back down, doors open, opportunities appear. Everything seems to confirm that their approach is working. But success has a hidden danger. It can convince a person that they no longer need to question themselves. The moment someone stops examining their own behavior, growth ends and blind spots begin. This is where the real problem starts. Because arrogance has terrible eyesight. It sees victories but ignores warnings. It remembers successes but forgets mistakes. It focuses on strengths while pretending weaknesses do not exist. Over time, a person becomes trapped inside their own self-image. They become so convinced of their superiority that they stop adapting, they stop listening, they stop learning, and life has a way of punishing people who stop learning. The very confidence that once made them effective begins causing costly mistakes. They underestimate people, they overlook details, they dismiss concerns. They assume every situation will end the same way it always has. But life never guarantees that. Sooner or later, they encounter a situation their old methods cannot solve, a person they cannot intimidate, a challenge they cannot manipulate, a problem they cannot overpower. And because they spent years relying on the same strengths, they never develop the tools needed for something different. Before we go further, I want to pause here with you for just a moment. You have stayed through every word, and that itself is the trust of an heir beginning to believe. This channel was built to carry this kind of word to hearts that have been counting the wrong treasure for years, who need someone to speak the deed with their name on it out loud. If this message has been doing that for you today, consider going to the link in the pinned comment below. Give what your heart freely offers. A coffee, a small seed, anything at all. Because what you plant into a mission that carries this kind of word to people whose hands have been clenched around too little for too long returns to you as more of the very open-handed inheritance being described. The link is pinned. Give when your spirit says yes. That is when the hidden weakness finally reveals itself. The thing they thought made them invincible was actually making them vulnerable all along. The confidence that once protected them became overconfidence. The control they depended on became obsession. The aggression they used as a weapon became a liability. And the worst part is that they usually do not see it until the consequences arrive. By then, the damage is already done. The strength they worshipped has transformed into the very force pulling them down, proving that unchecked power often carries the seeds of its own destruction. Number 5. They thought your kindness meant fragility. One of the most misunderstood things in human behavior is kindness. Some people look at it and immediately assume softness, weakness, or lack of awareness. They think a kind person is someone who cannot say no, someone who avoids conflict, someone who lacks boundaries, someone who can be pushed around without consequence. That assumption feels safe to them because it feeds their belief that they can control others easily. So they test it. They push a little. They stretch limits. They ignore boundaries. They observe how far they can go before resistance shows up. And because kindness often comes with patience, they mistake patience for permission. What they fail to understand is that kindness is not the absence of strength. It is controlled strength. It is restraint backed by awareness. It is discipline wrapped in calm behavior. A person who is truly kind is often someone who has already seen the ugly side of people and still chooses not to become it. That is not fragility. That is choice. But someone who is used to dominating others rarely respects that distinction. They interpret silence as submission. They interpret forgiveness as forgetfulness. They interpret tolerance as inability to respond. So they continue pushing, convinced they are dealing with someone harmless. Then the shift happens. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a clear boundary being enforced, a calm refusal, a firm decision, a line that cannot be crossed again. That moment confuses them because it breaks their entire model of understanding people. They expected collapse, but they meet structure. They expected emotional chaos, but they meet clarity. They expected weakness, but they meet someone who has simply stopped allowing disrespect. This is where their misunderstanding becomes dangerous for them, because when kindness finally stops absorbing bad behavior, everything they relied on disappears at once. The access they took for granted is gone. If this word is already reaching the place in you that has been afraid to receive, I want you to respond right now, like this message as your first act of agreement with what I am placing in your hands today. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so that every message prepared for you finds you at exactly the right moment. And go to the link in the pinned comment below. By sowing into this mission, you are helping carry this kind of word to hearts that are still counting the wrong treasure, still confusing the wage with the inheritance. What you give comes back to you as the very open-handed receiving being described. The link is pinned. Give when your spirit says yes and then stay, because there is still more ahead. The emotional leverage they depended on is gone. The predictability they exploited is gone, and they realize too late that kindness was never a lack of power. It was power under control. The biggest shock is not that the person finally pushed back. It is that they always could have and simply chose not to until the line was crossed. That realization exposes how much they misunderstood the entire situation from the beginning, and how badly they misjudged something they thought they could easily control. Number 6. They were studying your surface while ignoring your foundation. One of the biggest mistakes controlling or manipulative people make is assuming that what they can see is all there is to a person. They focus on surface-level things like how you react in the moment, how you speak under pressure, how you appear when things get tense, and how quickly you respond to challenges. To them, those visible reactions become the full definition of who you are. But that is only the surface. And surface-level understanding always creates wrong conclusions. People like this rarely take time to understand depth. People often fail to study the deeper qualities of individuals, focusing instead on isolated moments and surface reactions. They assume they understand a person's strength, missing the resilience, emotional control, and mental endurance built over time. This leads to misjudgment as they believe they can predict responses. When faced with challenges, a person may reveal a level of depth and stability that the observer did not anticipate. Consequently, those who manipulate others are often unaware of the instability created by their own negative actions over time. Their deceit and betrayals weaken their credibility and relationships, leading to eventual consequences they fail to connect with their behavior, wrongly seeking external blame. Additionally, people who try to exert control often overlook those with a history of overcoming greater challenges. They miscalculate the resilience of individuals with prior experiences, assuming that pressure will produce expected responses. Lastly, opponents may hold on to outdated perceptions of others, failing to recognize that growth and change are continuous processes. This results in battling a version of someone that has long since evolved, misjudging their current strength and responses. What once affected individuals may no longer do so as their growth and evolution surpass previous limitations. Others, however, fail to update their perceptions, relying on outdated assumptions about them, leading to a disconnect between expectations and reality. This failure to recognize changes creates misunderstandings and ineffective interactions. Moreover, in attempts to control the narrative surrounding others, individuals inadvertently reveal their own character. Their tone, words, and urgency may seem aimed at others, but often expose their mindset. As observers notice these inconsistencies, their narrative shifts from weakening the other person's image to revealing their own biases and frustrations. Additionally, the dynamic of endurance versus intensity highlights that loud, forceful tactics do not always succeed. Endurance prevails by maintaining steadiness amid chaos and pressure. Intense individuals often react quickly, exhausting their energy and creating openings for those who remain stable. Lastly, relying on fear as a control mechanism backfires against those who have detached. Instead of eliciting panic or compliance, detachment leads to calm decision-making, rendering intimidation ineffective. Hence, the understanding of human interactions and conflicts reveals insightful dynamics beyond mere emotional fluctuations. Manipulating individuals who no longer engage emotionally proves ineffective. Pressure tactics see diminishing returns, leading to detachment and a lack of control over fear. Control dilutes when participants withdraw, exposing the fragility of fear-based influence. Many mistakenly believe past successes guarantee future results, leading to reliance on established strategies instead of adapting to evolving circumstances. This mindset fosters blind spots as new variables and conditions emerge, making previous methods obsolete. The shift occurs when familiar reactions cease, prompting confusion and an inability to adapt. The lesson often avoided is that control has limits. Not every situation bends to pressure. When past strategies fail, the realization dawns that power relies on awareness rather than dominance. Achieving strength involves recognizing that true power surfaces when faced with unexpected resistance. As illusions crumble, previous confidence gives way to an uncomfortable truth. The loss of control highlighted their misperceptions. Awareness emerges from the contrast between assumed influence and actual limits, allowing clarity to replace confusion. Understanding that strength is defined not by dominance, but by resilience is vital. Ultimately, exposure to unpredicted realities fosters genuine awareness and growth.